My name is Rowan Hale. I'm 38, a systems architect who spent half her life turning chaos into logic. I've never been the loudest in the room, but I'm usually the one holding it together. And today, that room was falling apart, from the cafe across the street. I could see their reflections in the glass tower the board gathered around the long table, the projector washing their faces in blue. Chase stood at the head, sleeves rolled, smile polished for the investors. My name wasn't on the slide deck. Of course, it never was. Inside, the applause had just started when the door opened. Harold, the company's senior counsel, stepped in gray suit, pale face, a single sheet of paper trembling slightly in his hand. He didn't look at Chase. He looked at the CEO. "Apologies for the interruption," Harold said, his voice thin but steady. "There's a legal issue with the system currently under discussion." The air seemed to stall. The CEO frowned. Now Harold nodded once, unfolded the page, and began to read. Clause 2A. License to proprietary framework terminates upon voluntary separation of the architect. The words hit like a pin dropped into a silent cathedral. A few blinks. A chair creaked. Chase's smile faltered. Architect of record, Harold continued. Rowan Hale, separated from employment 6 days ago. For a moment, no one moved. The CEO lowered his head, hand covering his mouth. Then softly, almost to himself, he said, "You let her quit." The projector light flickered against the polished table. Someone's pen rolled off and clattered to the floor, behind the glass. I could almost feel the weight of realization settling over them, what it meant, what they'd lost. Outside, rain slid down the cafe window in thin silver lines. My coffee had gone cold, untouched. I watched the building without blinking. Every pulse of fluorescent light reflecting the word error I knew was now appearing across their dashboards. I gathered my coat, left a few bills on the counter, and stepped into the rain. 1 week earlier, I'd asked for a raise, a week before the boardroom imploded. I walked into Chase Brantley's office carrying a folder thick with proof. 9 years of uptime reports, audit compliance, cost savings, every number that kept the company's servers humming while his slogans filled the air. He didn't look up right away. His desk was a museum of self-importance branded water bottle, wireless charger, gold nameplate, a small mirror angled just enough to catch his own smile. "Rowan," he said finally, stretching the word like taffy. "What's up?" I laid the folder on his desk. "It's about the raise we discussed last quarter. I've compiled updated metrics. System efficiency is up 48% since migration. I've taken on 4 new accounts without additional staff." He flipped through the pages like they were junk mail. "You know, I love that you're detail-oriented, but finance has been reviewing overhead." He leaned back, fingers laced behind his head. "And, well, the numbers aren't great." I waited. He liked to circle humiliation like a shark, slow, predictable, certain he'd already won. "So here's what we can do," he said. "Option 1, you stay on with a 30% pay reduction. Still salaried, still benefits. Option 2, you walk." The air between us thinned. Outside, I could hear the whir of the server room fans through the wall. I thought of every late night, every silent fix that kept his presentations flawless. He smiled small, smug. "We can replace you by tomorrow." I nodded once. "Okay," for a heartbeat. He looked almost disappointed. "Okay, you don't want time to think." "No need," I said. My voice was calm enough to make him flinch. He laughed awkwardly, reaching for control he'd already lost. "Totally your call." I closed the folder, slid it back toward me, and stood. "It is." When I walked out, I didn't look back. His reflection caught in the glass wall, a man mistaking arrogance for power. He didn't know he'd just signed off on the most expensive sentence of his career. The rain had started again outside. I remember thinking how clean it sounded, washing everything that didn't matter away. My desk had always been immaculate rows of cables coiled like surgical tools, monitors arranged at exact angles, Not a single sticky note out of place. Order made sense to me. Chaos did not. But that morning, when I started packing, I realized how many years of my life had fit inside those clean lines. The office was quiet. Most of the team was at lunch or pretending to be. No one wanted to make eye contact with the woman who'd just told their boss okay and meant it. I slipped my mug into a box, the one that said World's Okayest Manager, a gag gift from a Christmas party years ago that had somehow become prophecy. Under the keyboard tray, I found a faded photo me. Linda Cho, the former CTO, and Janine Morales from legal, all holding mugs that read IP Queens. We'd been celebrating the first full integration of the system that later became the company's core. Linda retired to Santa Fe. Janine moved to Spain. I stayed. I built. And now I was done. I opened the bottom drawer. Inside, beneath unused PTO forms and an untouched stress ball shaped like a cloud, sat a thin gray folder labeled in my handwriting Exit R. Hale. I'd made it 3 years ago, during a weekend when the servers kept crashing and management wanted to outsource the entire back end. I didn't sleep that night, but I wrote something better, an insurance policy. Amendment 6. The clause was simple if I ever left voluntarily. All licenses tied to my proprietary framework would terminate unless reissued under new terms. Linda had signed it, Janine had notarized it, and I'd kept it quiet. 1 page of text, a single signature, a quiet fuse waiting for oxygen. I placed the folder into my bag, zipped it carefully, and looked once more at the empty desk. Then I powered down my monitor, slung the bag over my shoulder, and walked out steady, silent, final. Amanda Ditt's office smelled faintly of paper and bergamot tea, old world, deliberate, the kind of place where every book had a purpose and every silence was intentional. She'd been my family's counsel years ago, the one who'd untangled a licensing dispute that could have bankrupted my father's small firm. When she heard my voice on the phone that morning, she didn't sound surprised. "Bring everything," she'd said. Now she sat behind a mahogany desk, half-moon glasses perched low on her nose, reading through the documents I'd slid across. Her nails tapped lightly against the top page as her eyes traced each paragraph. I'd forgotten how steady she was, how nothing rushed her. Not even time. "This is clean," Amanda said finally. Her tone clipped but approving. Signed by the former CTO, notarized by in-house legal, time-stamped and properly archived. She looked up. Clause 6, termination of license upon voluntary separation. You understand what that means? I nodded. Once I left, their rights to the framework ended. Exactly. No wiggle room. They'd need a new agreement, in writing, to continue using it. Otherwise, every active deployment technically violates your intellectual property. Her pen made a sharp sound against the page as she circled a date, October 12, 2025. The day I'd left. The line beneath it glowed faintly in the late afternoon light. "Do you want to file a cease and desist right away?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "Let them think I'm gone. They'll call soon enough." Amanda studied me, then smiled a small, knowing curve of the lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. "They have no idea what they just lost." I reached for the pen she'd placed beside the folder. It was heavier than it looked, black lacquer with a gold tip, the kind of pen that outlasted trends and tempers alike. I signed my name in quiet, deliberate strokes, each letter steady as breath. When the ink dried, Amanda slid the papers into an envelope and sealed it with one clean press of her hand, a sound like a lock turning. 3 days after I walked out, Valen Systems announced a new internal initiative. Chase called it Lean Optimization Week, complete with a Slack banner and a digital gong sound effect that played every time someone streamlined something. I could almost hear his voice through the press release, confident, hollow, rehearsed. He'd told the staff that change was good, that efficiency was progress. What he didn't mention was that my department's documentation had gone with me and that the framework now running every client account was living on borrowed permission. By midweek, the first cracks began to show. Someone from finance posted in the all hands channel asking why billing dashboards were returning 403 access denied messages. A junior developer joked about ghost code, the support queue filled with flagged API calls no one could replicate. Across town, I sat by the window of a narrow cafe on Pine Street, a half-finished cappuccino cooling beside my laptop. Outside, the rain turned everything to watercolor traffic lights bleeding into puddles, the city's reflection soft and uncertain. On my screen, the logs flickered, unauthorized license checks, sync failures, timeout warnings that meant nothing to anyone except me. I hadn't triggered anything. The system was simply obeying its own rules. Rules I'd written long before this week ever began. My phone buzzed on the table. Naomi DevOps. You left. Peter QA billing module is down again. Please tell me this isn't you. Jenna HR. That meeting wasn't supposed to go like that. Are you okay? I let the messages pile up. The phone hummed once more, then stilled. I turned it face down, the screen fading into black glass. Across the street, a delivery truck hissed through a puddle, sending ripples across the window. I watched them spread and fade, rhythmic, certain like code running in perfect sequence. Every system breaks the way it was built to, and some lessons. I thought, only start when no one's left to explain them. By Friday, the city had cleared enough for the sky to show a hint of blue. I met Mara Linton at a small restaurant overlooking Lake Union, the kind of place that served lunch on white plates and refilled water before you noticed it was gone. Mara was Lexarian Systems Vice President of Product Sharp, warm, deliberate. She'd reached out years ago after a tech conference panel, back when we were both still pretending sleep was optional. When she'd called this week, her tone carried that easy confidence of someone who already knew the answer but asked anyway. Rowan Hale, she said now, leaning back in her chair, the woman who quietly kept Violin standing while everyone else was busy branding it. I smiled. You make it sound noble. It was mostly caffeine and code reviews. She laughed. You built their spine, we all know it, and now it looks like they've misplaced it. The waiter brought salmon and espresso. Seattle's favorite paradox. For a while, we talked shop legacy systems, migration pain, the myth of agile leadership. Then the conversation softened, the way it does when two people stop competing and start understanding. Burnout's real, Mara said, stirring her coffee. I've watched good engineers disappear into it. You don't strike me as the type to vanish quietly. Not my style. I said, but I do like clean endings. She studied me for a moment, something knowing in her gaze. We're expanding infrastructure, real projects, fair contracts, no egos. If you ever want to design again without politics, Lexarian would make that happen. It wasn't a pitch. It was an opening. The kind of offer that didn't need urgency because time would eventually choose for you. Outside, the rain began again, thin, silvery, gentle against the lake's surface. I watched the ripples travel outward, each one erasing the last. I'll think about it, I said. Let's see how the week goes. Mara nodded, as if she already knew I'd said yes to something deeper than a job. On Monday morning, Violin Systems threw its grand unveiling the next-gen infrastructure launch. The event took place in the glass-paneled atrium on the 16th floor, a space that looked more like a startup museum than a workplace. Banners hung from the ceiling, all white and blue, with slogans Chase probably wrote himself faster, leaner, infinite. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. The live stream link appeared in my feed like an invitation to an old wound. I clicked anyway. There he was, Chase Brantley center stage, immaculate suit, wireless mic clipped to his collar, basking in LED glory. His voice carried that synthetic confidence reserved for people who've never stayed late to fix their own mistakes. Our architecture, he said, has redefined scalability. It's adaptive, modular, built from the ground up for velocity. On the projection screen behind him, my diagrams appeared redrawn in his favorite color palette, the initials in the corner gone. Every node, every path, Every algorithm mine. Rebranded. The audience applauded as he gestured to the chart showing reduced overhead. The CEO, seated in the front row, nodded with the solemn approval of a man who believed what he saw. Then, in the corner of one of the staging monitors, a faint message blinked in red license handshake failed. It pulsed once, then vanished. No one noticed. The demo continued. Chase moved from metrics to projections, throwing around words like elastic scaling and load harmonics. The investor smiled. Cameras flashed. Champagne waited on ice in the back of the room. Across the city, I sat at my kitchen table, my laptop open, terminal quiet but alive. The logs had started whispering warnings cascading softly, orderly, like falling dominoes. I didn't type a command. I didn't need to. The code was doing exactly what it was meant to, verifying its right to exist. The presentation reached its crescendo, Chase grinning under the lights, applause swelling. But beneath the surface of every polished slide, the countdown had already begun. The applause was still fading when the glass doors opened. The sound wasn't loud, just the hush of expensive shoes against polished tile, but it sliced through the room sharper than any microphone could. Harold Klein, senior counsel, walked straight to the front, a single sheet of paper in his hand. He didn't look at Chase, didn't glance at the investors. His focus stayed fixed on the CEO. "Apologies for the interruption," Harold said quietly, "but this requires immediate attention." Chase blinked, still smiling for the cameras. "Harold, can this wait until no—" Harold said. His tone wasn't angry, just certain. He unfolded the page. Clause 2A. License to use proprietary framework terminates upon voluntary separation of the architect of record. The silence that followed didn't fall. It descended. Someone in the audience laughed once, soft and confused, before realizing no one else was joining. The CEO's expression changed, the kind of stillness that comes right before a storm. "Who," he said slowly, "is the architect of record?" Harold looked down at the paper, though he already knew. Rowan Hale. Resigned 6 days ago. For a moment, nothing moved. The hum of the monitors, the faint tick of the cooling fans, it all sounded too human. Chase's smile collapsed in on itself. "You let her quit." The CEO's voice broke just enough to betray him. "You didn't read the amendment." Chase stammered something about oversight, about drafts and transitions, but no one was listening. One of the investors shut his laptop without a word. Another reached for their phone. On the projection screen, the final slide still glowed with Chase's name, his title bright in blue. Beneath it, unnoticed until now, another red notification appeared. Unauthorized license detected access throttled. Across the street, I sat in the same cafe where this had all started, through the rain-streaked window. I watched as the lights in the Valen atrium flickered once, then dimmed. No sound reached me, only the reflection of a city finally learning the cost of forgetting who built its foundations. 2 days passed before the phone rang. I was sitting on my balcony, a mug of black coffee cooling in my hands, watching the early fog roll over Elliott Bay. The air smelled like salt and rain, and for the first time in months, my mind felt quiet. When the screen lit up with an unfamiliar number from Violent's corporate exchange, I already knew who it was. "Rowan Hale." I answered. A pause. Then a man's voice measured, formal. "This is Grant Feldman, General Counsel at Violent Systems. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "You are," I said, "but go on." He cleared his throat, a soft rustle of paper on his end. "We'd like to open a discussion about reinstating access to the spine framework. Temporary? At first, just to stabilize active clients." The wind pushed against the railing. I could almost hear the panic behind his composure, the way someone sounds when trying to keep an empire from tilting. "Reinstating access," I repeated, meaning licensing. "Yes, under mutually acceptable terms." I let the silence stretch until he filled it. We understand you have ownership rights confirmed by the notarized amendment. We're not disputing that. We'd just like to find a way forward that's, equitable for both parties. I looked out at the water, gray and endless. Triple the rate, I said. And my name restored on every piece of documentation, internal and external. Architect of record, properly attributed. There was the faintest catch in his breathing. That's steep. So is rebuilding what you stole. He didn't answer right away. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cut through the wind. Its cry sharp and short-lived. Finally, Grant spoke again, his voice quieter now. Send your terms. I'll make sure they're signed. I ended the call without saying goodbye. For a moment, I sat there, the city humming beneath the overcast sky. Then I placed the phone face down beside me and watched the tide rise slow, inevitable, reclaiming what was always its own. 3 weeks later, I woke to the sound of waves instead of traffic. The cottage I'd rented near Port Townsend was small. 2 rooms, white walls, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own breathing. I worked at a simple desk by the window, my laptop open, the ocean framed in the glass behind it. The logs on my screen were steady now. Spine, my system, was running clean, licensed, credited, and paid 3 times over. The new contracts bore my name in black letters, not buried in metadata or footnotes, but right at the top, Architect of Record Rowan Hale. The first deposit had cleared last week. I didn't check the number twice. Money was never the point. It was about ownership of my work, my time, myself, outside. The morning light blurred through fog rolling off the bay. I sipped coffee gone lukewarm, scrolling through unread emails. One from Mara Linton at Lexarian ready when you are. Another from MIT's research lab, subject line guest fellowship proposal. And a third from a nonprofit in Oregon teaching coding to girls in underfunded schools. Would you mentor our next group? I smiled at that one longest. The cat rescued years ago from a server room full of cables jumped onto the desk and sat on my keyboard, purring like static. I set the mug aside and ran a hand over her fur. On another monitor, a Valen Systems update appeared in my inbox. Quarterly report system performance at 99.98%. Beneath it, the new header powered by Spine licensed from Hale Systems. The words settled in quietly, like closure does when you've stopped waiting for it. I closed the laptop, pushed my chair back, and stepped outside. The air was cool, damp with salt and cedar. The tide moved in and out with the same rhythm it always had, untouched, unbothered, free. For the first time in years, I wasn't running diagnostics or watching for errors. I just stood there listening to the sea and let everything finally be still.